Right, well, good morning, everyone. For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Jonna McEntee, and I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Museums Association. I want to thank you for joining us this morning for the OMA webinar, Effectively Communicating Your Museum Reopen and Beyond. I want to apologize again for the technical difficulties we had this morning with the link. Thank you all for being so flexible and fast on your feet to get that new information. I really appreciate your patience as we got started a little bit later. But like I said earlier, we'll make sure that we have plenty of time after Ceci is done with her presentation so we have time to ask questions. So thank you again for your patience. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. We have a great program for you, and I want to get right with it. A few housekeeping items first. To help eliminate any background noise while Ceci is presenting, we ask that you please keep your microphone muted and refrain from using your camera. We do have a chat box that's available on your settings bar. It's the speech bubble symbol, and I want to encourage all of you to post any questions or comments you have in the chat box during the session, and we'll make sure we address as many of those questions and comments as we can during our Q&A time. This session is being recorded, and the link to that recording will be available on the OMA Workshop Resources page, and I'll be sure to put that link in the chat box as well. There's a lot to cover today, and I know we got started a little bit late, so without any further ado, I want to introduce today's presenter. Sharing her expertise with us today is Ceci Dadisman, Digital Marketing Manager at Form. Ceci has 15 years of experience successfully marketing the arts and nonprofits utilizing innovative and cutting-edge initiatives. She is nationally recognized as a leader in digital marketing and specializes in multi-channel communication campaigns. I know Ceci has a lot of great information today, so I want to let her dive right in. So Ceci, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. Like Jonna said, I have a lot of experience. I have about 15 years, well, more than that, 15 years of experience marketing the arts. I've dedicated basically my entire career to arts and culture and nonprofits. Currently, I work at an agency here in Cleveland called Form, and we only work with arts, oh my gosh, and we only work with arts and culture and nonprofit organizations, so that's a good fit. I say all this because I want to let you know that this webinar is framed and it comes from a lens of a place where I have been you. I have worked with very small organizations, also very large organizations, although most of my career has been dedicated to working with small and mid-size, including organizations that are volunteer run. I know we have a lot of different types and sizes of organizations on the webinar today. So my goal is that the things that I'm going to present are applicable to all and certainly scalable if you are a little bit larger. And you can accomplish something in a slightly different way. But for the smaller organizations here, you'll still be able to implement some of these things. We're going to talk about a lot of things today. And if you feel like you are getting overwhelmed, please know that it is not the expectation that you implement everything that we're going to talk about right away, right? That's not possible, no matter what size your organization. My goal is that you'll be able to take at least one or two things that we talk about today and implement them in the very short term. And there might be others that maybe you would implement in the mid to longer term, okay? So as Jonna said, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll make sure to address those, and we'll leave time, ample time for Q&A at the end. I also want to let you know that I have my dogs here with me, so I'm hoping that nobody walks by my window and they start barking. But if they do, I know that you will be understanding. Work from home life. Okay. So I want to start out with some data here because I think that this is the most important thing for us to look at the moment. These two slides coming up here are actually from Colleen Dylan-Schneider, and she gathers data on arts organizations. And this is sort of the most comprehensive data that I've seen from a super reliable source. So as museums, we are sort of lucky in that people as of right now are saying that they would be more likely to visit a museum or an aquarium or a zoo when we sort of start to transition back into quote unquote normal activities. So that's a good place to be in. Obviously, you know the reasons for this, right? Because it's easier to control the number of people than it is for, let's say, a concert hall or a movie theater when 2,000 people are crammed in there at once, sitting inches away from each other. So we are at a good spot for when things start to reopen. I also want to share this, and so the question is here in this data is, what would make you feel sort of comfortable going to a museum? And of course, the number one thing is a vaccine, right? We hear this all the time, and that's not surprising. But the second thing, obviously, the government lifting restrictions. But the third thing is seeing others visit, which I thought was really interesting, right? Because that gives us a little bit of a framework of people are going to be interested in social proof. Right? And this sort of ties in to communications as we're going to talk about them. So let's get sort of right into, now that we've looked at that sort of baseline data, let's get right into the meat of the issue. If you've ever seen me present or attended one of my webinars before, you're probably familiar with this graphic. This is what I call your communications ecosystem, and it bears repeating today. Just because we are in this very unusual time does not mean that the fundamentals of communication are any different. In fact, the fundamentals of communication are even more important now. So this is your ecosystem that you have. You've got all these different channels in your ecosystem, and a successful communications campaign is going to rely on all of these channels working together. Your organization may use some of these channels and not others, maybe some in some combination, but odds are you are communicating on more than just one channel, right? So we're probably using emails, we're probably using social media, and we're probably using traditional, right? Traditional in my world is like, direct mail or radio or something like that. I also have online display ads, because oftentimes we will do online display ads as well. And what I have in the middle is your website. Your website is your most important and valuable communications channel, period, full stop. If your website is not easy to navigate, if it's not updated, if it can be updated, but it's not super easy to do that, if it's hard for people to find information that they might be looking for, let your website be your first priority. If you're listening to me and saying, my website is totally in that shape, after this webinar, contact your web person to get it in shape, because it's going to be even more important as you start to reopen for you to disseminate information and for you to make potential visitors feel comfortable visiting your museum, and also just let them know what they're going to expect. Right? Okay. So the fundamental principle here, the real root principle, is relevance. Right? When we communicate in a relevant way, we're going to get people to engage, and that's what we want. The way to achieve relevance is this. We want to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time on the right channel. When all of these things come together, then that is going to create a relevant message. If the message is not relevant to the recipient, they're probably not going to engage with it, right? If it's, let's say, an email, and the subject line of your email denotes something that's not really relevant to that recipient, they're probably not even going to open it, right? Because they know right away that they're not interested in what you have to say in that email. Relevance in our communication is even more important now than ever. Making sure the right segments, the right groups of people that you have in your sort of sphere, in your ecosystem, are receiving the right messages. And we'll talk about how to segment those things. Even if you are a very small organization, you are still going to have segments, right? Let's say you have members, non-members, 2 segments right there. Let's say you have donors, which you probably do. Donors, non-donors, 2 segments, right? So even if your list, your mailing list or your email list is small, you're still going to have these groups of people that are alike in many attributes or one attribute that are going to need to hear slightly different messaging. And we'll get into that a little bit more. Right now, when you're communicating your reopening, or even beyond the reopening, or even right now when you're not open, the important thing is to speak authentically and transparently. And really, this goes for any time. Right? When we speak to our people, whether they're members or donors or just, people who are visitors, we should be speaking authentically. We should be speaking in regular terminology that everyone is going to understand. Certainly, you may have a segment where you can speak a little bit differently because maybe they're highly engaged with your organization, so they will understand some terminology that the average person might not. But overall, we should think about speaking authentically and transparently. And really what this means, what this shakes out to mean, is that we need to eliminate jargon and org speak. Now is not the time to bog down our communications with jargon and org speak, especially now. Although for me, this is all times. We should not do that. We need to be focusing on the patron. Take a step outside of yourself and think about what questions your patrons might want answered. Right? These questions might be things as mundane as what is the parking situation, right? Or in this particular case, how do I get admission to the museum? Do I have to buy a ticket? Can I just show up, right? Or it could be things like, what are the exhibitions that are going to be open, right? It could be a range of things, range of questions. For some of your segments, there might be some specific questions. If you have a segment of members, they might want to know, well, what member benefits do they have right now? Or will there be any special member things happening when you reopen? So let's focus on the patron or the visitor. I'm using the word patron just as sort of generalities here. Let's focus on what the patron is going to be looking for, right? And come from that place without using jargon and without using any org speak. That comes back to that authenticity and transparency. People can see org speak or advertising speak a mile away. I would offer, when you're thinking about this and eliminating jargon and org speak, think about how you might tell a friend or somebody when you're talking on the phone. How would you explain whatever it is you're talking about to them? I would be willing to bet that it's different than what you might have on your website or what you might type out in org speak. To take sort of a non-COVID example here, if you're talking to someone about an exhibition that you have currently on view, I would be willing to bet that what is on your website, the descriptive copy, is going to be different than how you would communicate that to a friend, a neighbor, a fellow art person, or a fellow museum person, right? All of those are going to be different segments. Different things are going to be relevant to those groups, right? And this is where the segmentation comes really important. And we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so I have sort of 5 things to remember when we're thinking about communicating authentically and effectively, right? The first thing is to identify your target audiences. And this is per communication here. This isn't necessarily a very broad overarching thing, although all of these things are still applicable. But when I'm talking right now, I'm talking about a specific communication to really bring it down to the micro level. So for any specific communication, meaning let's say it's an email about your reopening, who are the target audiences that you're trying to reach? And you're going to have multiple, right? You're probably going to have members. You might have other types of people who are highly engaged with your organization, maybe people who visit frequently, anyone like that. You probably are going to have just visitors who have attended at any point in the past couple of years. Docents, volunteers will probably be another segment. And then maybe other people who are in your communication sphere, people who are on your email list, but they're sort of dormant, people who follow your social media, this kind of thing. Identify who those groups are. And then for each one of them, we want to craft messaging that is going to be relevant to each of those target audiences. And we've got to speak authentically. We've got to talk to these people like we know them, because we do, especially if they're members. We know that they're members, and we know that members are going to have specific questions and specific things that are going to be relevant to them. Right? Obviously, docents, if you have docents or other volunteers or tour guides, right? They're going to have specific questions and they're going to want to know specific information, right? Once we identify those audiences and that relevant messaging, then we have to look at what are the most effective channels to deploy, right? Sometimes the most effective channel for a particular group may be a channel that you don't already use. Or maybe it's a channel that you're not necessarily using in the best way. The example that I always give for this is Instagram, right? If you have an Instagram and you're simply repurposing what's on your Facebook word for word, that's probably not the best use of Instagram, because the audiences and the feel and the voice are so different. If you have a program for children, let's say, where you'd probably be trying to reach moms, Instagram is going to be a great channel for that. So more of that messaging can probably go on Instagram than maybe on Facebook, although moms are also Facebook power users. The next thing, once building upon all those three things, is going to be make sure that you're sending these communications in a segmented way. So grouping those target audiences, those are segments, and sending those communications segmented. So I hear from a lot of organizations that say, oh, well, do you segment your audience? And they go, oh yeah, I segment my audience. In our email, we have a list of members, we have a list of visitors in the past year, we have a list of, XYZ. And I said, well, do you send separate emails out to all those groups? Oh no, we just kind of send the same email to all of them. That's really not segmentation. In order to be effectively segmenting, you want to make sure that you're sending messaging to each one of those groups that is slightly different, right? Let's say, to use the sort of family kids programming example again, let's say you are announcing that you have some program that is going to be for families, and that's going to be sort of coming up. You are going to want to send that particular message probably to your highly engaged people, sure. But obviously you're going to want to send that to the people who have attended or engaged with your family programming in the past. And that's going to have specific messaging tied along with it. What questions are those parents going to ask? What are they going to want answered, right? Try to answer all those questions. And then, of course, the call to action. Every communication should have some sort of call to action, right? Even if the call to action is just to go over to your website for more information. A call to action doesn't have to be revenue-based. So with these communications, what do you want people to do next? Unfortunately, people are not likely to infer. So if you want people to go over to your website to read your complete statement and rules and protocols for your reopening, make sure that you specifically say that and provide a direct link over to that page, right? If you have, if you're going to continue virtual programming, which we'll talk about later, and you're sending an email out about that virtual programming, hopefully, because hopefully if you've been doing that already, you're providing a direct link over to where they can find out more information about the virtual programming. So right now, in terms of things slowly opening up and talking about even engaging in current virtual programming, the people who are most likely to engage, and specifically the most likely to return to your venue, are members and people who are highly engaged. And this is based on real data, right? So, and this makes sense because if people are members or if they're highly engaged with you, there's a level of trust there and they're interested. They're the ones who are going to want to return. If they're members, they want to come to your venue, right? And highly engaged is going to, the attributes for someone who's highly engaged, that's going to vary organization by organization, right? I can't tell you who should be highly engaged. Some people who would be, right, would be members, donors, people who attend frequently, maybe people who also attend special events or classes, things like that. I would kind of, recently or on an ongoing basis, I would sort of classify those folks as being highly engaged with you. So in your segmented communications, I would focus on those groups first. There is no one message that's going to be relevant to every single person. And one of my most disliked phrases is the general public. None of us have the budget or the time to reach the general public, right? It's just way too broad. Certainly some of your communications may be accessible to the general public. Social media is definitely like that, right? Anybody could look at your Twitter feed or your Facebook page and see the information. But who is most likely to engage with those communications, right? Right now, about reopenings, that's probably going to be members and highly engaged. So I know that you all have, you're sort of wearing many hats, and perhaps even the scope of your work has even changed since you've been closed. Focus on, I would offer that you focus on your members and your highly engaged folks, because those are the people who are going to be the sort of the first wave to come back. All right. So let's talk about some channels. So your website, just like at any time, this isn't just now, but anytime, your website is your online hub. That is why it is your most important channel, right? Everything that somebody would want to know about your organization ostensibly is on your website, right? Even in regular times, you're directing people there from social media, from Facebook, even from your traditional communications, right? If you send out a postcard about an upcoming exhibition, you probably have your website URL on there, right? And you're directing people there for more information. Even for an annual appeal letter or a membership renewal letter, you probably have your domain on there. So make sure that your website is updated and easy to use, and that it answers questions that a visitor might have. And this is now and anytime, right? And again, like I mentioned before, try to step outside of yourself and think about somebody who might be new or who hasn't attended in a while, especially to answer those questions. Okay, now with reopenings, I always like to have real life examples, but of course, because here, not many places have reopened. So, but in Europe, some of them have, actually some of them reopened today. So they have a little bit more. So I've pulled some examples from European museums just to give you something to look at here. So Here we see clearly sort of an online hub landing page that gives all the information about what to expect for the reopening. You should, on your website, have one place, one landing page that has all of this information on it, one place to go, so that when you have that call to action in all of your social media and your email, you're sending people to one place. Right. And you can see here, they have everything from hours to, what safety measures they're taking. They're moving to online only ticketing so that they're doing timed entry, and they have information about that there. Right. And this page actually is a little bit longer, but I had to cut it off somewhere for the purposes of this screenshot so that you could still kind of read it. Right. So look at your website and create, if you have not created it already, a landing page. And if you have created the landing page already, take another look at it and make sure that it is answering all the questions. I like this one in particular because right at the top, it says that tickets are sold exclusively online, period. Because that's probably going to be the top question people are going to have. Well, like, how do I get in? Do I buy a ticket? Do I just show up? That's probably going to be the main thing. And right here, they are answering it. And then, of course, you can see along the right, you can see their other information that they have. And again, this one was a lot longer, but I had to cut it off. So I hope you're kind of seeing and thinking about how you might be able to accomplish this.
Ceci, before we move on, there was a question. What was the name of the museum from the example that you just gave?
That one, was, oh gosh, I forget which one that was. Oh, wait. And I can't move my little thing and it's blocking it. Hang on. Hide video controls. Oh, this one is, excuse my face being in this here. I'll have to look it up because, oh, this is the Institute Giacometti, the Giacometti Foundation. This is this one. They're in Paris.
Great. And the first example you gave?
That was the overseeing organization of the major museums in Berlin.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. The Staatliche Museen zu Berlin. Let me see if I can get my, well, I can't see my top thing anymore. So Jonna, let me know if there's other questions because I can't see the chat thing. Okay. So second channel is email. I think email is going to be your most important communications channel to reaching those members and those highly engaged people. Because odds are you probably are going to have their emails. You're going to be able to segment them in the most targeted fashion. You have to segment wisely, though, to make sure the right message is getting to the right people. And not everyone on your list should get the same email. This goes for now and 2 years from now, right? There's not one message that is going to be relevant to every single person on your list. And you're probably saying, you might be saying, if you send messages to everyone or almost everyone on your list, it's okay. But you may be saying, well, she doesn't know what she's talking about because everyone could be interested in the 10 things that I have in my email newsletter. Okay, so sure, they could be, maybe, okay, fine. There's a chance, but that's not going to be the most effective way to show people that you know them and that you know what they're going to find relevant. Your members probably are going to be interested in all of those 10 things, but even there could be some segments of memberships too, right? If you're a larger organization and you have like family memberships versus couples memberships, however you do that, family memberships, they're probably going to be more interested in stuff for kids and families, right? Even though they're a member. Couples, maybe more things for adults. So you have to start from a place of what is going to be the most relevant, right? And then maybe you can start to pepper in the things on the fringes. So right now, your most important segments are going to be, remember, those members and those highly engaged patrons. Spend the most time on those in your email and crafting that message. So obviously, here's some examples of different segments that you might have that would require different messaging, right? Specifically, I've talked a lot about, members highly engaged, but specifically program specific visitors. So if you have visitors that repeat attend certain programs or classes or things like that, they're probably going to be most interested in, well, when are those things resuming and how can I participate? And then, of course, I mentioned before, donors, teaching artists, any kind of program leader, whatever you call them, they're going to have very specific questions about the reopening. And hopefully you're already doing some regular communication with them, but this is going to be an even more important communication. Okay. So social media is going to be the channel that really does reach that larger group. And it's not really possible, right, to segment a Facebook post that you put just on your page for a specific group and ensure that it's going to meet that target group, right? So inherently, you do have to have a mix of social media content. And I'm sure that you're all probably leveraging social media. I hope you're all leveraging social media in this time because it's really turned into a more valuable tool than ever before in keeping people engaged. But you do have to choose the right channels. And this is sort of how you can segment a little bit in an organic sense. And I'll talk about paid in like 1 second. So I have some new data. This is from Pew, so it's legit. Basically, this tells you what the most widely used platforms are. And so Facebook Facebook has been it has had the highest number of active users for many years, as you can see. So hopefully you all are putting time and energy into Facebook because that is probably where most of our patrons are, right? The other social media channels that are probably going to be useful are Instagram. A lot of museums use Instagram. Yours may as well. Yours may not, and that's okay. But Instagram, obviously, because it is so visual, right? A lot of museums are going to use Instagram. And as I mentioned before, for reaching moms and younger people under the age of maybe 35, 30, right? Instagram is going to be a very powerful channel, because the demographics do skew younger. And I hate to sort of bring age into it because there's so many more aspects to communications channels and segments than age. But on social media, we can sort of see these trends, right? I have this in here solely because I want to talk about the elephant in the room always, where a lot of us, and I say us lovingly because I am an arts marketer, a lot of us kind of have the perception, if some of our patrons or some of our members are older, that they are not consuming content on digital channels, which is just not true. Because more and more people in that age group have screens. Right? It's really hard to get a phone these days that is not a smartphone, right? And it is true that many years ago, older people didn't necessarily have a laptop or a desktop computer. They sort of skipped that. But now they have tablets and smartphones. And of course, this is a huge generalization, but just to put it out there, that try to take age out of the equation when we're talking about content consumption, right? Don't assume that a certain segment is not going to consume your content online. right? Because they probably are. So before we leave, before we leave social media, I do want to say a word about paid social media campaigns, specifically Facebook, because Facebook is, you can run paid Instagram campaigns and those are good too. But because Facebook is sort of the largest used platform, I'm just going to frame it within Facebook for the moment here. If you want to reach those target segments, those target audiences that you have identified, if you want to make sure that you're reaching them on Facebook, you're going to have to pay for it. It's just a fact. Facebook is a pay-to-play model. So is Instagram, for that matter. And Twitter is kind of becoming that way too, because they're all run with algorithms. And there's no way to beat the algorithm, right? If someone tells you they can beat the algorithm, they are not being truthful. There's certain things that you can do to kind of help your content rank higher, but there's no way to quote unquote beat it, because the algorithm involves so many different things that our feeble brains can't even take in, right? You can reach specific segments that you've identified using Facebook advertising with something called custom audiences. So if you have a list of your members, let's say, and you want to send them specific information for your members, right? You're probably going to do it with an email, right? That's first off, kind of baseline, right? You may do some direct mail, which would be okay too. If you want to reinforce that messaging and take advantage of that communications ecosystem that we talked about today, you might want to load that member list into Facebook as a custom audience and deploy content specifically for them. Odds are that those members are going to see your messaging in multiple places before they engage, right? And even if they have engaged with one of those channels, them seeing it again is not necessarily a bad thing, because it is just a reinforcement of the message that you're trying to share with them, right? You can also do Facebook advertising just by interests and things like that. But I think in this particular time, its best use is to leverage it with those target audiences. Now, the budget doesn't have to be large for this kind of thing, especially if you're using custom audiences, because it's going to be a relatively small pool of people. But I would recommend that you try it out to make sure that the right people are seeing that message on that right channel. Because as you probably know, just because somebody likes your Facebook page doesn't mean they're going to see your content, because of how the algorithm works, right? Everything is pay for play now. Facebook wants to make money. It's very simple. Okay, so when you're creating that content, you want to look at what it is. Obviously, it has to be relevant for the people it's reaching. I'm sure that many of you have virtual events or programs, right? Downloadable activities, behind the scenes, right? All of these things. Making sure that those are going to the right people is important now, and it's also going to be important in the future as well. Deploying information about these programs, in addition to your reopening, comes down to that relevance factor again, right? Is this the stuff that these particular people are going to be interested in? Downloadable activities, for example. If you've got that list of people who usually come to your family programming, and your education department has, or your education person, or maybe you are the education person in addition to everything else. If you have downloadable worksheets, coloring pages, crafty things, whatever, you're probably going to want to make sure that those things specifically are sent to those segments. Those are going to be relevant, right? If you're a parent of small children like I am, they're telling us that maybe like this homeschooling thing is going to go on and on, like seemingly forever, right? A parent receiving an email from you with a very clear subject line that says, here is a virtual activity for homeschooling, or whatever you want to say, is going to be very relevant. That would be very relevant to me right now in my life. And I would probably open up that email. And this is also where jargon comes in. You probably have a name for that program, or maybe you have a name for that activity, in the subject line of that email, you probably want to eliminate that jargon or use it in addition to sort of the regular wording that anybody would understand. Okay. I also have here, I haven't seen a ton of this, and I wish I was seeing more of it, is offering reading or podcast lists, right? I think this is a great opportunity for us to share some other resources with people to get them more engaged with what we do, right? I'm sure we all know of podcasts or even episodes of podcasts that relate to maybe art, to museums in general, or maybe a particular artist that we have on exhibition, right? Curating these things together and providing people with a real resource can only help us now and in the future by further educating and engaging people about what it is that we do. Also, as we go on, we always kind of think about subscriber only, member only, donor only activities, content, right? As we go on, this is still going to remain important, whether it's right now and it's virtual content or moving forward. I use the example of your members probably want to know what's going to happen with their membership. Is their membership going to be affected? Do your members get special things when they go to your museum once it reopens, especially in that initial time, right? Do they get first dibs at tickets if you're doing timed entry, right? Is it, you know, for a span of, let's say, a week, tickets for them go on sale before tickets for sort of the rest of the people? These are the things that they're going to want to know, that you're going to want to make sure that you share with them in a very authentic and transparent way. Here, I have some examples. Part of this communication, this authenticity, is including photography and video. Photography and video content is always important because people are going to respond to visual things a lot quicker, and they're going to engage with visual content than they are going to with text, right? You probably know this. If you think about it in your own life, you know, if you're on your phone, kind of thumbing through, scrolling through Facebook or Instagram, what's probably going to make you stop to look at that is the image. You're going to see the image, stop, and then go back and read the actual text, right? That's usually the order. As human beings, it's science. As human beings, we react more quickly. It's a couple milliseconds to images than text. So as you start to reopen, show some of these safety protocols that you're putting in place. And after you have, show real visitors who are in your museum. If you remember way back in the beginning, that one slide about, you know, what would make somebody feel comfortable. And one of them was seeing other people go, right? Leverage that social proof and make sure that you have visual content that shows people at your location. All right. Here's an example of the National Museum in Krakow, Poland. This is one of their Facebook posts, and they are talking about what that people can expect when they reopen, right? So they're saying on May 9th, you know, this is what you can attend. These are the hours, right? And then this post is actually kind of long, but for the purposes of this screenshot, I didn't expand the see more, but it's pretty detailed as to what types of precautions they're doing. And they even made this cool little graphic, which is quite cute, right? But they have here on the right of that graphic, everything that they're going to do, what people can expect, what they need, that they need to wear masks, et cetera, et cetera. So being very clear on all of your channels. And I would imagine that this same sort of thing went out in an email as well, in a very clear way. Now, this is actually just from this morning. Because a lot of the European museums are opened today. So this morning before this, I kind of was scouring to try to find some more examples because I couldn't find them last week. So here's another example, right? They're being very clear about that they're reopened and they have a link right here, that call to action over to their website. They also have a link to get tickets, and it should be noted that this is one of the museums of that organization that oversees many Berlin museums, and they have it branded a little bit with this "We Are Open" little, I don't even want to call it a logo mark because it's, you know, a circle with text, but they all have that same sort of logo mark that's repeated in their communication saying that they're open. I thought that was another kind of good idea that people might be able to implement here, so that when you are continuing to post content on your social media, you can include a little graphic of some sort, maybe like this or similar, reminding people that you are indeed open. Now, of course, you wouldn't use that forever and ever in eternity, but perhaps for the first couple of months, you would do that just to make sure people remember that they can visit. Here's another example. This is the Vatican Museums. They created some videos with one of their employees that works at the museum, kind of showing that the museum is there, it's open, this is what you'll expect, you know, thanking people for being patient while they've been closed. So it gives it a little bit more of a personal touch to create a short little video. Now, it's important that the videos aren't necessarily all that long, right? They don't need to be all that long. But if you would like to create a video that shows some of the safety precautions, let's say you have installed hand sanitizer stations and, you know, whatever else you're doing, you know, have somebody go through and give a short tour that really shows people what you're doing to make sure that people are as safe, that visitors are as safe as possible. Now let's talk a little bit about virtual programs. As in the description for this webinar, I promised that I would talk about this. And this was sort of something that I wanted to make sure I've said. What we have seen in this time when arts organizations have been closed, and this is for museums and others, right? Performing arts, all kinds of other organizations. We have seen absolutely an explosion of engagement to our content, which is proving that when we remove barriers to attendance, we will see increased engagement. There are organizations out there that are seeing people from all over the world engage with their programs, you know, whether it's an education program or a virtual tour or a live streamed concert, right? More people than ever before are taking part in those kinds of programs. I would hope and I would offer that once we open again, that we don't shut down automatically these virtual offerings, right? Because it comes down to these different audiences. What do they need, right? Yes, we want to engage our members. We want to foster people attending our events, coming to our venues in person. But all of us, right? If you get into museum admin or arts admin, we're all in this to bring the art to as many people as we can and engage as many people as we can in this great stuff that we have and the great stuff that we're doing, and sharing what makes all of this so cool with as many people as possible. So when you identify those audiences, think about what do they really need. And one example of this is, because most of us have like education programs year round, right? You probably maybe do field trips or things like that. So many of us have moved those things completely online. I know a lot of museums are doing completely virtual field trips, right? This type of program is the perfect thing to continue after we reopen. We all know that it's really tough. It has been really tough, even in the past few years, for field trips, right? It's tough for schools to get permission to go on a field trip to take the kids off site. And the ones that they're allowed to do happen a certain number of times per year, and then they're kind of out, right? So if you're not one of those times, tough luck. If we could keep those virtual field trips alive and keep putting resources toward them, imagine how many more students and teachers we could be reaching and providing that content for them to integrate into their curriculum, even if they can't join you physically. So when we're thinking about virtual programs and the longevity of virtual programs, like which ones do you continue, which ones do you not, the first thing is to look at your data, right? Because there may be some programs that you just don't have the bandwidth to continue doing virtually, or maybe you don't want to because you're afraid it might cannibalize the in-person version, right? And that's a totally valid concern, right? The first thing to do, obviously, is look at your data. What was the engagement for each? Some may be higher, some may be lower, right? This is where you need to identify the metrics, the specific metrics for success, right? If it, let's say it is virtual field trips, right? Internally identify what number of participants or number of teachers, or if you're just making it available to sort of anyone, parents who are homeschooling, etc. What number are you going to look at as a successful number? Identify that, and that will help you identify which programs show promise for the in the long run, right? Once you've identified those, determine what investment you might make to keep those programs going, right? Concurrently with your in-person programming. I would hope that if something was very successful in a virtual space, that you might be able to shift some of those resources that you have over to continuing that program. And then every program is sort of dependent on how it's deployed. So a lot of us in this time have kind of launched virtual versions really fast using whatever we have available, right? Think about those programs that you're going to continue, and think about how you might be able to upgrade how you deliver those programs. Is there a piece of software that you could use, or even just a kind of a different method, maybe regroup a little bit to try to make it a better experience? And then, of course, the communication strategy. How are you going to incorporate that virtual programming into your existing communications for those target audiences that you have identified? It may be new, right? Here's an example of virtual programming. I love this. I've used this a lot in the webinars and blog posts that I've been doing in the past couple of months. This is the New York Historical Society, and they moved their group presentations completely virtual to a format like this, right? A Zoom type format. And you do have to pay for them. I think they're $10. Yes, $10 if you're not a member, free for members, right? So this is something that they would have had in person before that now they're offering in a virtual format. This is a sort of a direct repurpose. Now, I have not had contact with anybody at this particular organization, but I would be interested to know, and I will reach out to them because I'm just nerdy like this. I would be interested to know what their numbers have been like and if they're going to continue this online. Another example, at the High Museum, they did a virtual student exhibition, which I think is just so wonderful, right? This can engage students, budding artists, right? Really anywhere. And it's relatively lo-fi, right? All you have to do is have a Flickr account or any SmugMug account, and you can load all those images in of their artwork, and it can be there to view at any time. So relatively low time commitment and resource commitment, but the opportunity for high numbers of engagement. Pun not intended. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love that program. This one is from Mocha here in Cleveland. They are doing these little bite-size 15 minutes with a particular artist. So this artist is creating a small work during these 15 minutes, and they also kind of talk about their process a little bit. These little bite-sized things, I love these because these kinds of things are only going to bring people closer to the artists and to the work that might be on display, right? And here's another too. This is from the Reading Museum, and this is from their planetarium. They've made their planetarium shows free online, which is a great thing. Now, maybe, I pulled this example up, maybe they don't want to continue to make all of them free. Maybe they would continue to offer some of them free for school groups, for those groups that aren't able to actually attend the museum sort of in a field trip format. So they've already put them online. So clearly they're available in a virtual format, but deciding which target audience would be the most interested in this to kind of keep that going, even if it's not for every single person, because they want people to come to the planetarium to see the shows. So that would be an example of a kind of hybrid, right? Which I think is also something that is completely valid. All right, let's talk about resources here. You probably all are using a number of these resources, and some of these are going to become even more important upon reopening. If you already use a particular CRM for your reopening, you've got it covered, right? If you're going to do timed entry, you have the ability to set up different tickets for different time blocks and set a maximum number of people and everything like that. If you don't have a CRM, using something like Eventbrite is a really good way to do that, to accomplish that, super easy. If you just want people to fill out a form to accomplish that, or a form to get resources for a virtual program, if you use WordPress for your website, which many of you probably do, there's something called Gravity Forms that's pretty powerful that will allow you to do that in an easy way. On that website, you want to make sure one of the things in answering those questions is to have a comprehensive calendar. So make sure that your calendar is easy to access and easy to kind of figure out what each event is and how to go about attending each event, whether it's virtual or in person. And I have here, if you're using WordPress, the events calendar here is a really good plugin for a comprehensive calendar like that. The top three are actually Google solutions. And these are more for virtual programs and education programs, right? If you are creating these sort of packaged programs and you're going to continue using them, having an easy way to deploy them is going to be important. So using something like Google Drive, the one on the right is Google Forms for people to fill out a form for something. And then in the middle, Google Classroom. A lot of teachers, if you're an education person, you probably know this, a lot of teachers are using Google Classroom. How can you create those resources in a way that is really easy for them to integrate into Google Classroom? And then I also have Dropbox here, which is sort of similar to Google Drive. You can house files there. These two can also be really important for your docents and your volunteers. You probably are going to have a set of documents that you might want to share with them. Having them grouped all together in Google Drive or Dropbox is going to be a super easy way for you to disseminate that information. Okay, I did a lot of talking. It's a good thing we have a couple extra minutes. Oh my gosh. John, are you there? Hi.
I'm here. Hello. And thank you, Ceci. That was so much wonderful information. And we do have some questions.
Good.
Reminder to everyone that if you do have questions, type those into the chat box. And I know due to our technical issues, we got off to a late start. And we want to get to all of those questions. So if you need to jump off the webinar, the recording will be available and posted on the OMA workshop resources page as soon as it is ready. So Dottie from the Mantua Historical Society asks, we do not have a website. Is there help to get us one up and running? I know she asked about through OMA or the History Connection. OMA does not offer website hosting, and I don't believe the History Connection does either, but Ceci might have some good resources available.
Well, there are a number of free tools out there, free and low-cost tools to build a website. Certainly, one of the ones that is popular is called Squarespace. It's very inexpensive. It's very easy to build something yourself. I receive no compensation or commission from mentioning any software that we talk about here. I only mention them because I think they're good tools. So Squarespace would probably be one of the most popular. And with a website, it really only has to have a few pages to be useful, right? So you don't have to think about creating one with, 50 pages at first. A home page, this landing page for, your protocols and procedures. Also, you probably want to have an events page there to show people, what's happening. There's also some very, very simple website builders. If you already use MailChimp has a very sort of kind of foundational website builder, very simple. If you're a Yahoo user, Yahoo has one. Constant Contact now has one. So you can create very, very simple websites in a variety of ways. But I like that you asked that question, because the important thing overall is to have a website, right? Don't rely on a Facebook page or anything like that to be your online hub. You definitely want to have a website that is at a domain that is your organization name.
Excellent. So there are a lot of questions about Facebook and Facebook ads in particular. So Sarah asked, what's a good price tag for a Facebook ad? And Matthew has a follow-up question saying, I agree with Sarah, the price we spend per ad always comes up among staff. Is there a % of our annual budget that we should set aside for Facebook ads?
You guys are going to hate my answer, because there is no one answer to that question, because it varies so widely between, so cost per Facebook campaign, and you want to think about it not as the cost per ad, okay? Because that's kind of the older way of thinking about, like, if you're used to placing like print ads, right? We know that there's one cost for that insertion, right? You can tell that I've been doing this a long time, because I used to do traditional too and live my life by insertions in the newspaper. So, and there's one cost per insertion. For Facebook, you're going to want to look at the cost per campaign. So if you've got an exhibition coming up, whether it's your reopening or something in the future, this all still applies. If you've got an exhibition coming up, you're going to want to look at how long do I want to run that campaign leading up to that exhibition. It's probably going to be about a month, right? So, and the cost per that campaign is going to vary pretty wildly depending on your targeting, what audiences you're using, how big of a pool of people are you trying to reach. Obviously, the more people, the more expensive, right? Because the more money you put at it, the more people in that targeting group that you can put your content in front of. So it's a really tough question to answer. I mean, at a very basic level, and this is not necessarily answering the questions, but I'm hoping this can lead you to what it might be for your organization. At a very basic level, you only want to be, and this is getting very sort of ticky-tacky. So if you don't really run Facebook ads, you may not understand the jargon that I'm going to say right now. You want to optimize your campaigns for traffic, because you only want to pay for when somebody clicks over to your website, right? When traffic is generated to your website. So you want to pay for traffic, and you want to have your cost per engagement or your cost per click be under 25 cents. That's going to be what you're going to shoot for. If you have cost per clicks and cost per engagements that are, 80 cents, 90 cents, $1, over $1, you need to rein in your targeting. Your targeting is too broad, right? So I kind of go a little bit more by the cost per engagement rather than the cost per campaign. Now that said, Facebook does have minimums for certain things. So, it's going to have a $5 minimum for certain types of outcomes or considerations. So generally for a month campaign, you're probably not going to get into that in any meaningful way for less than maybe $100 ish, $150. which is a very small amount of money, especially if you think about how much it would cost to place an ad in a newspaper or someplace else, right? It's still pretty inexpensive. If you have more specific questions, please feel free to email me. Jonna, we can make my email available. I'm happy to answer anything like super specific for your particular case.
Excellent. And I think you answered Abigail's question, but Abigail, if not, please feel free to clarify in the chat box. But she asked, do you have guidelines for starting out in paid content on Facebook, currently spending 0 and need to make the case to leadership? So I think you answered that question. But
yeah.
Abigail, if not, let me know.
Yeah.
Kate asks, on another webinar, it was recommended to create a group within your Facebook page to better generate engagement. Is this a good alternative for targeting audience if the budget is too tight for paid ads?
So groups, it is true that groups tend to have higher engagement. Also, group posts are weighted higher in the algorithm. So if you have a group, people who are members of the group are more likely to see the content than like people who like your page, okay? So there are positives to having a group. That said, a group isn't the same as a page. A group is meant to be very interactive and very conversational. So groups tend to work better if they're a discrete group of your folks. So, you know, having a members only group or having a group of people that take classes, things like that. I think those could work as an actual Facebook group. But I wouldn't try to create a group that simply replaces a page, because it's not the same thing, right? And I see organizations doing that where they post exactly the same thing. Oh my God, I'm gesticulating too much. They're posting exactly the same thing on their group that they're posting on their page. And that's not really the deal with a group. You want to have as much interaction as possible, both you and the members of the group, but also members of the group together. And the thought that there's no budget for any paid Facebook, I would be willing to bet that you do have a little. With the right targeting and with the right outcome, very specifically defined, I bet you do have a little bit where you could make it very effective, right? Because I don't believe in spending money just to spend money, right? That's why I hate this term general public, because nobody has the money to reach a general public. But for very specific targeted programs and target audiences, you probably are going to have a little bit of that. And feel free to email me and we can talk like specifically for your organization.
Sure. Christina asks, we're offering virtual field trips and a ton of other virtual tours, gallery talks, etc. right now for free. We're really missing the field trip revenue and the revenue from our programs. Can we charge a fee for these virtual things? Do you have any recommendations for what the fees should be? We've discussed giving access to virtual programs who make a gift through the website. Just looking for some more guidance.
Yeah, you're not alone. In fact, I was just talking with a colleague earlier this morning about this. In our rush to keep people engaged, right? Many of us have just been giving out the free content, right? And now so many organizations are going, oh my gosh, we've set a precedent, right? I think that in order to start charging for something, you have to give it a little bit of a different shape and maybe give it something a little bit of a different name. So if you've already done the virtual field trips currently free, is there a way that you can increase the content or provide additional content or additional teacher guides or more in-depth like guided tours or anything like that that can make it set it apart as something more than what you're currently doing? You know, is there a way that you can even more closely and specifically have different versions of these virtual field trips that coincide specifically with the curriculum guidelines, where you can say, oh, well, we have this general virtual field trip for anyone, but if you want this to be tied into this exact curriculum, then you have to pay for that. All of these are very general, right? But maybe you can think about how you can change it or offer something extra or bigger or more in depth that sort of warrants people paying for it.
Great. Alexis asks, when you've looked at museums that have already opened, so mainly those European examples you were giving, are there a few you recommend looking at? So their website, their social media, that you feel have done a great job with their communication so far?
Well, those couple that I referenced in this webinar are, and I looked through, and the reason why I didn't remember exactly which ones I put in, because I had about 5 different slides of them. And then I realized I had to take some out. To my surprise, not many of them did what I would consider a great job. If you notice, those photos that I had of people in masks in museums, I got those off of Getty Images because I couldn't find any museums that were using those kinds of things in Facebook posts, even if it was like their curators or staff or anything. Now, because this is all just happening right now, that may be forthcoming. So there may be additional things. But because this is a very changing situation by the minute, I couldn't necessarily find anyone doing a super great job right at this particular second. But I think that those examples that I gave, they're doing a pretty good job. And all of those things, I mean, and of course, we have the opportunity to be the ones who are doing a great job as we move forward. I think all of those things that I mentioned are going to be sort of the vehicle to achieve that level of really super cohesive, informative, transparent communications.
Great. Dottie asks, do you recommend that museums regularly send a newsletter? We are super small and we don't currently do this.
Well, I have a love-hate relationship with newsletters. I mention newsletters as an example because so many do them. If you send a newsletter, if you decide to send a newsletter, the only people who should receive that newsletter are your most highly engaged people. Because as I mentioned, they're the only ones who are going to actually want to read all of that stuff, right? But I wouldn't feel like you would need to do a newsletter if you if you communicate with people in other more targeted ways, or if you don't have enough stuff for a newsletter, right? Never do anything just for the sake of doing it, right? You got to have good content first. You've got to have enough content that's genuinely like interesting and compelling. So if you've got a lot of interesting and compelling content that you want to put in a newsletter for your members, let's say, by all means, do that, right? But if you don't have a ton of content and you just want to send sort of one-off emails for things that are relevant to members, then, keep doing that. You could always test out a newsletter as well and see how well it's received. If people, you'll clearly see from your MailChimp or Constant Contact data, how many people are opening it and clicking on things. The clicking on things in a newsletter is the real key to looking at and determining how effective it is. Because people could be opening it, but if stuff in it is not interesting to them, they're not going to click. So that's going to be the real metric to look at there.
Great. And I have one more question that if anyone who has been on any of the recent webinars know, I always end with a question like this, and it's a tough one, so I apologize.
Oh gosh.
But if we are facing another round of potential closures, maybe later this year or in the fall, what sort of things should museums be thinking about for their communications now and in the future if that becomes a reality?
It all comes back to that authenticity and transparency, right? If that happens, we have to continue to be transparent about it and say, this is what's going on. This is the decision that our museum has made in terms of, we're closing again based on, the CDC's recommendations, et cetera, probably like you did this time as well. If you have any sort of programs or tickets that you're selling, whether they are paid or maybe it's just a timed entry, if you have free admission, Be very clear about the contingency plan for that, to say, if we do whatever wording you want to use, this is going to be sort of very conversational wording, but whatever wording you want to use, if we do close before this program happens or before you can use these tickets, what is the contingency plan? Do you get a refund? If somebody has already signed up for a time, do you get first dibs at a time the next time? Whatever that might be, just be very clear about what those options are. And of course, no one is necessarily going to love that you're closing, but I think most rational people understand that this is about the health and welfare of people, right? If you're a Star Trek fan, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few and the one, right? So I think that being very transparent about those things, that is the key to communications always, but especially in this time.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ceci, for all of your great expertise and insight that you shared with us today. And thank you all for joining us today and for sticking with us through our extended time. Just before we end the session, I want to remind everyone that OMA does have several resources available at ohiomuseums.org, including our reopen consideration guidelines for museums. Excuse me. And our COVID-19 resources for museums. These lists are updated daily as we receive new information. So if you know of a resource you would like to see listed, or if your museum is offering a virtual or online program that you would like added, excuse me, another coughing. Okay, so if you have a resource that you would like added to the list, please feel free to email that to me at oma@ohiohistory.org. OMA also has 2 webinars upcoming next week: Caring for Collections During COVID-19 on Tuesday, May 26th, presented by ICA Art Conservation, and just added Best Practices in Keeping Museums Clean and Safe for Guests and Staff, Friday, May 29th, presented by Dr. D. Banks of Northeast Ohio Infectious Disease Associates. You can register for these webinars and see a full list of upcoming OMA events at ohiomuseums.org. We're also very excited to announce that registration is now open for the OMA 2020 virtual conference. More information and registration is also available at ohiomuseums.org. Thank you all again for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day and take care. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.